Hi and welcome back to the Bookwanderers Club. This is episode 6. Thanks for bearing with me with the little gap that we've had. I'm going to be doing these once a month from now on, so look out at the end of each month for a new episode. Now, coming up in this episode, I have 3 brilliant authors for you. First of all, we have Radiya Hafiza, author of Rumaysa, an absolutely brilliant debut novel that is a twist on some well-known fairy tales. Next up for the big questions segment, we have the wonderful Catherine Doyle, author of the Stormkeeper trilogy. She answers some of your big questions and tells us about the last epic book in the Stormkeeper series. And the last author for this episode is Annabelle Sami, author of the Agent Zaiba and the Llama books. So she's here for the Where Do You Get Your Ideas from segment to tell us about how she gets ideas for 2 different series, how she keeps them separate, and how she plots out her books. So without further ado, first up we have Radiya Hafiza. So welcome to the Bookwanderers Club. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about, I've got a proof which is very pretty, but it's not quite what people will see if they go to the shops, but you can still get the sense of it there. Your debut book, which is also Waterstones Book of the Month this month, so huge congratulations for that.
Thank you so much.
So to start with, could you just tell us a bit about the book and kind of where where you got the seed of the idea from?
Yeah, sure. So Rumaysa is a fairy tale retelling of 3 different stories. So it's Rapunzel, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, except in my version they're called Rumaysa, Cinderella, and Sleeping Sarah. And it keeps most of the original framework of those fairy tales, but obviously it's a bit different, and it's more about the girls kind of breaking out of their own situations and finding themselves and finding kind of their voice along the way, and also finding friends. And that's really kind of what the story is about there. So it's about making their own happy endings, especially too. And so Rumaysa is it kind of came to me when I was at work a couple of years ago, and I was temping and very bored, and actually didn't always have a lot of work to do sometimes. So what I ended up doing was just like quietly on a Word doc, like on a half screen, just started writing about a girl trapped in a tower, and that's sort of where it started. And I'd always had like a fairy tale retelling in mind because I've always loved them, like Once Upon a Time and all the Disney remakes they've been doing, and like reading Brothers Grimm's when I was growing up, that sort of stuff. So it's always kind of been there, and I just sort of wondered, like, what would it be like if someone like me, who's Muslim, was in these books. And that's kind of where the inspiration sort of struck, to have like a hijabi Rapunzel. And I also just love the idea of like throwing a long hijab out of a window instead of a long hair. So that's kind of where it all came from, really.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've kind of always been interested with fairy tales, so I was going to ask you a bit more about that. Like, did you used to read them as a child? Were they something that you like have always enjoyed reading?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially as a child growing up, I loved Cinderella the most. That was definitely my favorite. And I just love, there's something about fairy tales, like the magic, the wonder, the sort of the mystery in them sometimes as well. And also I'm a sucker for a happy ending too. So I really loved them growing up. But it was something that I never really thought almost that someone like me could be in until I was a lot older and kind of started to read more widely. And that's kind of where it sort of came from, to have a book with, brown girls in them, and them leading their own path and finding their own kind of happy endings in that way.
Yeah. And I think now might be a nice moment to give us a bit of a taste of the book if you are happy to do a little reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start from the beginning, shall I?
Perfect.
Um, so this is a little bit from Rumaysa, the first story. So once upon a time, in a land quite far away, snow was falling heavily from the dark sky, blanketing the land of Splinterfell in white. It was a night full of promise to some, for the first day of snowfall marked the beginning of winter and the coming of festivities and joy. It was time to shut up windows, spend time with loved ones, and retreat from the outside world. Not everybody could take part in such joy, though. There were some families who had less than others, and the fall of snow meant a definite end to the hopes of crops and work. There was one family who were particularly less fortunate than others. Naina lived in a little hut on the outskirts of the village and spent her day sewing clothes for wealthier ladies. Her husband, Sama, was usually gone for most of the day, trying to find work, but he never had any luck. Some said his bloodline was cursed to poverty, others cruelly and unfairly whispered that he was a bad worker, so nobody would hire him. When Sam returned home one night after another long, hard day of searching for work, his hands were once again empty. Naina began to weep, tired from her day of stitching with nothing to eat since morning. She feared for her unborn child. There were only 2 more moons to go until the baby came. Unable to bear seeing his wife so upset, Sama went back outside in search for food. Over the hill, right by the edge of the woods, there was one house to which nobody ventured too close. The dark wooden building was surrounded by different crops and berries in the garden. It was said the witch of Splinterfell lived there, though nobody had ever seen her, and that anyone who stole from her bounteous garden would have to pay a price. What that price was, no one could be sure, but few were willing to take the risk to find out. Sam, however, was desperate. He snuck his way over to the house and slipped into the large gates that encircled it. Should I stop there? Is that okay?
It's completely up to you wherever you want to go to.
Brilliant. I might stop there then in that
Okay.
case. If that's good.
Totally fine. Okay, cool. So how did you decide which fairy tales to do your retellings of?
So Rapunzel was obviously the first one because it kind of just came to me obviously when I was at work that day. And I again love the idea of sort of throwing a hijab out of a window. And I think with the others, it was sort of like Cinderella's obviously my favorite as well. So I really wanted to put that in there and twist that around. And I think with Sleeping Star, it was like the first two were already about kind of girls breaking out of a certain situation. And so I thought that would be another kind of good one to kind of complete the set. And so that's where that kind of came from. And yeah, they were really fun to write, but also trying to think of like how to put those kind of twists in, because you've seen it done a lot of times by so many different versions out there. And so it was really also about thinking about how to kind of bring a bit of a unique spin to each different story as well. So yeah, that's sort of where it came from to pick those three.
Yeah. Were there any that were kind of in the mix that you attempted to use that just didn't quite make it?
Actually, yeah, there was Aladdin and Jasmine actually featured in the first kind of draft, but I think because that one's got quite a lot of I don't know, it was like a melting pot. Like you don't almost know where Aladdin's from. Like it's got kind of like Indian inspiration, there's a Middle Eastern stuff, like you don't really know. And I thought it would probably be best to like almost streamline a bit, like keep it in one area and keep true to those sort of places instead of just sort of throwing everything in, because I think there's a bit of criticism around Aladdin as well for those reasons. And I figured also maybe it'd be okay to do something a bit more like, I guess again it was about putting kind of a Muslim character in a story you wouldn't necessarily expect, and I think maybe Aladdin would have been quite like expected almost.
Right.
So yeah, so that's sort of, yeah, that was one that didn't make the cut in that sense.
Yeah. And they kind of, one of the reasons the book's so clever as well is because they're three distinct stories that you could almost read as individual sort of stories, but they're all linked through. Why did you decide to kind of structure it like that?
I think it came to sort of, again, trying to find something a bit different to do. Like you didn't want to, again, put something out there entirely like the same as something else. And I thought it'd be, again, really fun to kind of twist the things that you might have been expecting. So like in Isla's story, you would have been expecting a fairy godmother, but then I thought it was really cool if actually it was Rumaysa who was her fairy godmother instead. And again, with Sarah's story as well, that it's Rumaysa kind of climbs up a tower and manages to, save her. So yeah, it was really about just trying to, I guess, yeah, trying to twist things around a little bit. And I felt really nice as well to have them interwoven, because again, you get to see a bit more of the other characters that you saw in previous stories. I really enjoyed the idea of just having Rumaysa kind of jumping through the stories and helping and making new friends along the way as well.
Yeah, it's fab. I love the bits where she pops up. I think of the three, my favorite was Cinderella, just because I don't want to do spoilers, but the ending of it and the way you've twisted it, it just like honestly made me feel jubilant. Like it was just so joyous reading it. And I think, I love fairy tales as well, but it really makes you realize kind of how much the rhythms of what normally happens are just so ingrained in you. And I think, like, especially as girls, I think, and it was just, again, I don't want to do any spoilers, but I think, you've obviously alluded to that you've obviously put a twist on them, and it's just joyous reading these very familiar stories with this twist. And that one in particular, I just thought the ending was perfection.
Oh, thank you so much. Cinderella, I think that was like my favorite one to write as well. Out of the three of them, it kind of like just flowed the most naturally. Like the other two was a bit more harder to write them in a way, but with Cinderella it just came, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I wish everything I wrote came out like this.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could tell us anything about what you're working on next. Do you think you will stay in the kind of fairy tale inspired world or go elsewhere?
I'm not allowed to say too much because it's quite early days at the moment, but it will be fantasy, and it will be kind of maybe not fairy tale exactly, but kind of similar-ish. So I think so. Hopefully, readers will still enjoy it.
Okay, that's exciting. And you talked about how you'd enjoyed reading fairy tales when you were younger. I was wondering, kind of what were other books that had a kind of big impact on you when you were growing up?
I think absolutely Jacqueline Wilson, like everything of hers. I used to like run to try and find those books growing up, especially in the library as well. They were so good. Especially because I think at the time anyway, I didn't really know of other books like that in that sense, you know, talking about kind of like working class communities and broken homes and, you know, bullying and all those different things that you don't necessarily, well, I didn't anyway, didn't necessarily have access to those different kind of books being told. So I loved her. I loved her books. I still do. She's amazing.
Yeah, Jacqueline Wilson, I remember stumbling across, I grew up in a very rural area where we had a very tiny library, so I just used to read whatever was in it. And I remember stumbling across a Jacqueline Wilson book. It was the Girls in Love
Oh yeah, love
series,
that one.
and just I read that book so many, it was just so different to everything I'd read before, and I can really
Yeah.
vividly remember just, yeah, that a different kind of story and the impact that had.
Absolutely. She's such an amazing storyteller.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here,
Hmm.
which is this is this is one of those questions where as soon as you get asked it, your mind goes blank. But I was going to ask you about if there's been any kind of more recent children's middle grade books that you have particularly enjoyed that you would recommend to young readers.
I'm actually really excited about, I think Burhana Islam's Mayhem Mission.
Mm.
It's coming out, I think, you know, it came out yesterday, or came out 1st of April. So that looks really exciting. I'm really looking forward to reading that actually. Especially it's really cool getting to see like more Bengali, because I'm Bengali as well. So it's really cool getting to see more of that in children's book as well. So that's one I'm definitely looking forward to.
Yeah, awesome. I think I'm just staring at my desk. I got a copy of that just sent through this
Oh,
week. I can't wait to
nice.
read it. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so that's some book recommendations for young readers, but I know that we also have a lot of young writers who watch the Bookwanderers Club. So as per usual with our book chat segment, Radia's going to set a little writing activity for any writers who've been inspired by listening to hearing about retelling fairy tales and kind of those twists on old stories. So what's your writing prompt?
My writing prompt is for young writers to write their own fairy tale but base it on their own culture, their own family. Maybe there's like festivities that you do. So yeah, so that's going to be my writing prompt. Write your own fairy tale.
Awesome. And as always, if any of you do any writing inspired by this writing prompt or any of the others, you can share your stories with me at the bookwanderersclub@gmail.com, and I would love to read them. So thank you so much for joining us for the Book Wanderers Club. Rumaysa is out now you can see the proper cover behind, I can see the proper cover behind you, which I
Yeah,
think
let me hold one up.
there you go. Yeah, that's what to look out for in bookshops. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So welcome to the Book Wanderers Club. Thanks for being here. So we've got some big questions for you from Farfield Primary and 2 Mile Hill Primary. But before we get into those, we're going to chat a little bit about your books. So congratulations on the last book in your trilogy coming out. Could you maybe kick off by just telling us a bit about the Stormkeeper's battle and what readers can expect to find there?
Sure. So the Stormkeeper's Battle is the final book in the Stormkeeper trilogy, which sort of follows an 11-year-old boy called Fionn Boyle, who goes to stay on the island of Arran Moor one summer with a grandfather that he's never met. And then, you know, subsequently gets pulled into this sort of ancient magical war between good and evil. So in the Stormkeeper's battles, you might imagine it sort of centers around the kind of epic final battle between Fionn and the evil sorceress Morrigan, who's been risen from her grave underneath the sea cave by her terrifying followers called the Soul Stalkers. So Fionn, who sort of has discovered magic inside himself, is struggling with trying to get it out of him and sort of really wield the power that's been passed down to him by his ancestors and by the island. So he's in this sort of mad dash to raise an army of his own to sort of enter into this final standoff with Morrigan and her followers. And to do that, he kind of has to rally the other islanders, his really cranky sister, his mom, his friends, Sam and Shelby, and then, of course, a giant group of merfolk called the Merrows, an ancient whispering tree, and a majestic flying horse. And together they all sort of converge on Morrigan to try and save Aranmore and the world from her rising evil.
That is epic, and it is epic. I have read it and it was my favorite of the trilogy. And I feel like we should say, though, for readers who haven't encountered the Stormkeeper trilogy, it is definitely like you should start at the beginning.
Yeah, you'd be very confused if you hopped right in at the third one. I wouldn't recommend it. So Stormkeeper's Island is the first one, then the Lost Tide Warriors is the second one, and then the Stormkeeper's Battle is the culmination of the trilogy.
And what was it like writing the finale to like a trilogy you've been working on for so long? Did it feel kind of sad or epic, or were you glad to have it done?
It's like a combination of all three. Actually, to be honest, the third book was probably the most fun to write because you get to bring in all of these things. Like I was really excited to bring in the flying horse that was kind of hinted at throughout the series, to bring all the other magical elements together and really give Fionn and like his sister and Sam and Shelby their big moments in defense of this island. And I had been building up to those really, really big, exciting moments for 2 books. So by the time the third one came around, it was so fully formed in my head. It was great to just put it on the page and get all this excitement sort of out of me. In that sense, it was really fun because it felt epic. It was difficult because I had to write it 3 to 4 times. I had to keep rewriting it to make sure that it was like pacey and kind of hurtling at the right speed towards this conclusion. So in that sense, it was tricky because I knew I wanted to get it right. I wanted it to be better than the first 2. And so it was a longer process. It took about a year to really get to that point, but I'm really, really proud of it. And I'm so proud of the third one. It makes me proud of the trilogy as a whole. I feel like I gave my best to every book, which is a nice feeling. But I'm also happy to sort of move on to other things now.
And can you tell us anything about what you're moving on to?
Yes. So I'm actually in the middle of writing it, so I'll just be very vague, just because you never know what's going to change. So I'm writing a story now about 2 children, a brother and a sister, who find their way into they pass through a magical waterfall and find their way into this hidden enchanted kingdom called Tír na nÓg, which is it's kind of a really popular kingdom in various mythologies, especially Irish mythology. And when they get inside this like fabled beautiful land, they realize that actually it's cursed and there's a wicked mage who's controlling everything from the sun to the animals to the forests, and naturally they get stuck inside Tír na nÓg, and so they kind of have to enter this race against time to free the land and free themselves and get back home before it's too late.
Awesome. Right, now are you ready for some big questions?
Yes, I'm always ready.
Okay, so these, as I said, these are from a mix from Farfield Primary and from 2 Mile Hill Primary, so thank you to them for sending their questions in. So first of all, I'm going to start gently. So this is from Eliza, and she would like to know, do you get your inspiration from your life?
Yes, definitely. I would say like 80% of everything I write is inspired by either like my relationships with my brothers or my friends or my grandparents or my parents. And in terms of places that I like to set things, obviously the island of Aranmore is a real island where my grandparents are from, a place that I visited and absolutely love. And this new book, Tír na nÓg, is set obviously in a fantasy land, but it's very similar to Connemara in the west of Ireland, which is this kind of windswept, beautiful place by the ocean that's, I think, really rugged and incredible in terms of like its natural beauty. So I just basically look around me and I steal people and things and storylines from my own life, and then I add in just loads of magic and impossibility and stir it all up and make it into a story.
This question is from Evie, and she would like to know, which is your favorite book that you have written?
It's always tricky because there is a natural inclination to say the most recent one.
And that's literally what I always say.
But usually whatever, because it's freshest in your mind, and I guess that's the one that you're trying to promote the most. So it's going to seem perhaps disingenuous for me to say Stormkeeper's Battle. It would be a toss-up between the Stormkeeper's Island and the Stormkeeper's Battle. The Stormkeeper's Island because it was so, I think of it as an ode to my grandparents and my grandfather in particular, so it's very personally important to me. And the reason I love the Stormkeeper's Battle so much is because I think it's a really epic, exciting end to what I began in the Stormkeeper's Island. And I have a real fierce pride. I'm so proud of it. And I love reading over it and I love thinking about the stuff that are in it. So yeah, I'd say 1 or 3 of the Stormkeeper trilogy.
Yeah. Tyler would like to know, if you could go to any restaurant for free, where would you go?
Any restaurant for free? My goodness. So there's a place in California called Los Casuelos. I think I'm saying that right. And it's this incredible Mexican restaurant. And they just do like cheesy, delicious items, burritos and quesadillas and amazing guacamole and things that I didn't really have growing up. There's not a huge Mexican food scene in Ireland, unfortunately, especially not in Galway. So I think I would go there and I would eat my weight in cheesy Mexican food.
That's a very solid choice. Cassie would like to know, did your life change when you became an author?
That's a really good question. I've never got that question before. Yes is the answer. It changed completely because, you know, I think it changed a little bit with my very first book, which was I think 8 years ago now. I was able to move out and live with my friends in Dublin and have loads and loads of fun and work in my pajamas and just living the high life. And then when I wrote The Stormkeeper's Island, it changed again, and even better because The Stormkeeper's Island was quite successful overseas. So it's sold into over 20 different languages, which meant I get to go and travel to all these new places and countries to talk to children in like Italy or in Sharjah or in Arizona or somewhere. And that made it a much more adventurous life than I had previously. And so, yeah, it's definitely changed, definitely for the better. I feel really grateful.
Travel is one of the things you don't really think about becoming an author, and also I think because it's not really a guaranteed outcome, but it's one of the things that I have been the most grateful for as well, being published, is getting to travel to places I would have never gone to otherwise.
And actually I should add that because I live in Ireland, and my agent and my publishers are all in London, I started to travel frequently to London, and that's where I met you, Anna, and a bunch of other really, really close friends. So I feel it's like widened my friendship pool in a really nice way as well. So anytime I'm over there, I get to have loads of fun and do like silly things that we won't do. Fun, silly things.
That's one way of describing it. Ibrahim would like to know, what is your least favorite book?
This is potentially might be controversial, so I'm just going to say it and then just let me explain myself.
Okay.
I absolutely hate Charlotte's Web. Because I'm deeply arachnophobic. There's nobody in this world who is more afraid of spiders than me. Like, I can't even put it into words how terrified of them I am. And I remember when I was younger, I was like 8 or 9, I think we were reading it in school, like as a class book. And I understand that there's a lot of beautiful themes in that book, but I just, every time that spider came on page, I just couldn't. I could barely read about it because it was just too terrifying for me. It freaked me out so much. And so it's just, you know, for no fault of its own, it's more my fear. I have to say that I could happily never see that book again.
Josie would like to know what your opinion on Starbucks is.
The coffee shop Starbucks. That's a good question.
I didn't give any I said they could ask whatever they wanted.
That's actually a great question because I do have opinions on Starbucks, and my opinions are I love Starbucks because I associate Starbucks with America, which is where my fiance and his family are from. So anytime I used to travel there before the pandemic, Starbucks would always kind of represent that feeling of home over there. And now that we are firmly in the middle of this pandemic and we can't travel anymore, we buy in little Starbucks capsules that you put in your coffee maker, and then they make you a coffee. And the idea is they're supposed to taste like Starbucks, and they don't. In my opinion, they don't really taste like Starbucks, but we do have them as a little taste of home.
That's nice. That's such a good question, Josie.
Very specific answer for that specific question, but it's funny.
I enjoy that. That's the joy of these questions, and this is why I don't give any guidance on what they can ask about. Harry would like to know if it's hard being an author.
I think it can be hard at certain times. So sometimes it can be quite lonely. Sometimes if you're on a deadline and you have to write a book really quickly or edit a book, which is essentially like rewriting a book really quickly, it can be very stressful, and you can be working late into the night, sometimes to 2 or 3 a.m. and getting up really early. And there's always this sense that the book you imagine in your head is never quite as good as the book that you get on the page, and you go over it and over it and over it, trying to make it as close to that picture in your head as possible. And I've never quite matched them up. I don't think many people do. And so sometimes you can be quite hard on yourself and quite, I guess, doubtful of your talent or your creativity. But the benefits of being an author, like we just spoke about there, I think far outweigh the kind of the harder aspects.
Yeah, for sure. We have 2 questions from Magpie class who sent their questions in as a class. So the first one from Magpie class is, would you rather jump off a high building into a swimming pool or off a hot air balloon into the middle of the ocean?
Okay, great question. Now, I've actually been in a hot air balloon. Here's an interesting fact. What they don't tell you when you go in a hot air balloon is they don't know where to land. They don't have a landing plan. When you're up in the sky, they say, we're going to try and land in that field over there, but it all depends on the wind. So I can quite easily imagine a hot air balloon being blown out to sea and then you just having to jump off and make the best of it. Now, unfortunately, I'm kind of terrified of the sea, so I wouldn't do that. I'd probably do the high building into the pool. But the pool, I think, I'm no scientist, correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, the pool would have to be very deep, I imagine, to make sure that you don't shallow. If it's too shallow, you'll just hit your head.
This is a very nuanced would you rather. You have to, because
I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt here to this class, and I'm going to assume that the pool will be deep enough to absorb the dive. Okay. And if that is the case, then I would do building into pool.
Okay, great answer. Good to think.
Good question.
And the second question from Magpie class is, what is your favorite word and what does it mean if it's not a common word?
My favorite word is whimsical. And like a whimsical person is a person who kind of, I should look this up for kind of a little bit silly and happy and does like joyful, silly little things. Like, for example, I would consider myself quite whimsical. Anna, you're quite whimsical. My mother is very whimsical. Just like sending balloons to people, or I don't know, putting on an impromptu puppet show, or like
Which I would just like to say I would never consider putting on an impromptu puppet
show. Like so silly, whimsical fun, or like go and fly a kite one afternoon, which I've done many times and it's very fun. Just kind of little fun, silly things like that make your life brighter and more fun. So I like whimsy and a whimsical person. It's probably not a great definition, but it's a vibe. I always think of people when I think of the word whimsical.
Yes. And it's a fun, whimsy is a good word to say.
Whimsy. My other favorite word is melancholy.
On the other side of things.
I like the way it sounds, like melancholy, and that just means like very sad.
Yeah. Melancholy is a beautiful word though, isn't it? That is, it feels like it means.
Yeah, it does.
Actually a word for that though, isn't it? There's a word for words that.
Yeah, but I don't know what that word is.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a good word.
The class assignment.
Yeah. Yes, actually.
Find out what that
is. And our last question is from Katie, not our mutual pal Katie, but a different one. Who would like to know, what is your favorite ever book?
Favorite ever book. I kind of go back and forth between 2 or 3, but today, Katie, I will choose The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Because that just gave me a real obsession with wardrobes for years, and even now a little bit, I remember I used to run around my grandparents' house and just check all of their wardrobes, like just to make sure that, there wasn't one that might lead me into Narnia. And I remember like being in awe of Aslan, as though he were like a rock star. I just really thought he was so cool.
Yeah. Great choice. Great. Well, those are your big questions. Thank you again to Farfield Primary and 2 Mile Hill Primary for sending them in. If you are watching and you would like your class to send in some big questions from an author, there is an email address in the description box that you can get in touch with me. So thank you so much, Kat. Congratulations on the Stormkeeper's battle. And again, also in the description box, there will be details on where you can find more about Kat and her books and where to buy them. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So welcome to the Bookwanderers Club, Annabelle. Thank you so much for coming and being part of it. So this is a little bit of a twist on our Where Do You Get Your Ideas From segment, because Annabelle actually writes 2 series. So she's someone that's super interesting to talk to about coming up with ideas and making them into stories. So to kick off, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to the two series that you write?
Yeah, so one of them is a detective series called Agent Zaiba Investigates. This is the first book in the series. And then the second one is a sort of comedy fantasy series called Llama Out Loud. And the second book, Llama on a Mission, is about to come out as well. So those are the 2 series. And then these are the other Agent Zaiba Investigates books.
Cool. So let's start with Agent Zaiba Investigates. So can you remember kind of having the seed of that idea for that series? Like, what was it her? Was it wanting to write a mystery? What was the kind of very beginning of that idea?
So this is a bit of an unusual setup, because I actually didn't come up with the original seed of the idea. So there is a company called Speckled Pen run by Karen Ball, who is an editor, and she came to me saying that she'd had this idea of a young girl who wants to be a detective, and showed me some of the ideas that she'd had for the first book, and then we worked together on making them into the story. So the first book was more Karen's idea, and then on the following books I worked with Karen and also Matty, who is the editor at Stripes, and we had a group session of coming up with ideas. We had sort of, I would say, settings was the ideas that we were working from. So we thought, where do we want the next book to be set? And we went from there. So we thought the second book is going to be at a school summer fete. So what type of mystery would happen there? And then the third book is set in a big manor house. What type of mystery would happen there? And so that's how that idea started and became a whole book.
Yeah, that's so interesting, with the settings being kind of a key part. Do you think that is a particularly kind of useful thing for writing mysteries, like having a really clear idea of the place?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the setting in a mystery or detective novel is really, really important, because it does really inform the type of crime, and it informs the structure of the story. Because when you're thinking about a mystery or a detective story, it's all about who had access to that place at that time and who was there, and if it's a mystery that was happening in a busy shopping centre, there are like thousands of potential suspects, and that would be a really difficult story to write. So you do have to really think about the setting. I would say, for me, I think about that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of people who write mystery novels, because I'm not a big planner. And how do you, once you have your setting, how do you kind of develop it from there, and how do you make sure with a mystery all the clues kind of fit together properly, and you know who the suspects are, and how you do the red herrings? How do you plan it and put it all together?
So I think I was very lucky that I had 2 other people to work with on planning them, because I am also not I just don't think very logically and like structured. I like to think of the story and the excitement of the story. And I always would say, start with that. Even if you're writing something that has to be very structured, get excited about the story and the idea first, because that's what's going to drive you to finish it. so yeah, I definitely had to, we did these sort of sessions together where we generated ideas, and then we went away and took all the little ideas and put them into an outline, and then we did a chapter by chapter breakdown. So there were those different stages of planning, and in each chapter we would write at the bottom what clue had been included in that chapter, or what red herring had been included in that chapter. And the part of Zaiba's investigation as a character, she likes to make lists and she likes to make tables. So that's quite good as well, because you can include the planning in the story, where she, you know, halfway through the story, she'll be like, let's take stock of what suspects we have and what clues there are. So yeah, that's how I planned them.
That's a really good tip. If I feel like mysteries are there's so many wonderful mystery books out at the moment, and I am assuming that quite a lot of the young readers and writers watching are enjoy reading and hopefully writing mysteries. That's such a good writing tip for keeping track per chapter of which clues and which red herrings have been revealed. So moving on to your llamas, how did the idea for that series kind of come to you or get developed?
So Llama Out Loud was the first book for children, and just, I guess, the first book that I ever wrote. And I hadn't really thought about turning it into a book. I just wanted to give it a go. And I went to a writing festival, and I had to meet agents as part of the writing festival, and you bring your work to show them. And one agent asked in a brief for funny middle grade stories. And that agent is my agent now, Davinia. And I knew about Davinia because I knew that she championed diversity in children's books, so including characters of different races and lots of different things like that. So I thought, well, I know that I want to write a story about a British Pakistani girl. So I had her, I had Yasmin, and I thought, to make it funny, I'd quite like to pair her with the opposite of her. And do like a weird comedy pairing. And so I thought, what would be the weirdest sort of animal that I could think of? And I'd recently been to a city farm, and I saw a llama, and it was really strange. So I thought, okay, I'll do a llama, but it has to be a toy, because you can't be wandering around London with a huge llama. So it's a toy llama, but it's magic, so it can speak. And then I had them as a comedy pairing. And I wrote the first 3 chapters, and Davinia said, can I see the rest of the book? And I said, I've not written the rest of the book, and I don't know what it's going to be about. But I did kind of what you said about, you know, not planning. I just sat down and I wrote, and the story turned into what it turned into. And I think that you can definitely do both ways of writing. If you're someone who likes planning, then go with that. But if you're someone who is just excited about writing, and you have a great idea, you're excited about writing, then just sit down and write. You will have to go back afterwards and edit it a lot, so you can't get out of the planning.
Yeah.
You have to do that after I'd finished Llama Out Loud. We sat down and we went through and we wrote on the paper, you know, this should go here, this should go here, this needs to happen here, and this chapter's too short. And then I changed it and sort of molded it afterwards. But that's how that idea came about. And then we thought about what else could they do in the series, and then I had to sit down and think about that.
So I think this perhaps comes because I find that you get, I don't know, as a writer, you kind of have ideas quite a lot of the time, and then sometimes like little concepts or a person or a setting. How do you kind of sift out and feel like, oh, this is the idea that I think perhaps there's potential in, this is the one that I should focus on? Because I think it's easy to be distracted by lots of ideas. How do you know which one is the one to focus on?
Well, that's really interesting, because I'm currently developing 2 new series, and so I have been in an ideas storm of all these different ideas that I could potentially do, and thinking, oh, that would be interesting, that would be interesting. And it was very exhausting, trying to write things down. And I actually did just a really simple mind map to start with, where I wrote down different elements of things that I thought would be good. And so that could be anything from setting, characters, genre, something really small like clouds, I don't know, just anything. And then I would circle them and like put links between them and label the links. And then you can see quite easily the idea that hasn't got anything linked to it probably isn't very good. But also I think chatting through with someone else is really, really important and really useful, because I'd gone through this, I'd gone on this like idea storm and wrote down 4 potential ideas for new books, and had them quite like set. And then I showed them to someone, and it turned out that none of them actually were going to work. And I was really disappointed, and I was really upset, because I was like, I've come up with these 4 books and none of them are going to work. But it's because I couldn't see myself, because it made sense in my head. I could see how they would work, but it didn't make sense to someone else. And that's the most important thing, because you want people to read the books and understand the idea and the concept. So instead what I did was I did that initial getting little bits of ideas, like I'd like to do a book about that and that and that. And then I took them to, in this case, the editor that hopefully I'll work with, and said, what do you think about this idea? And we sort of developed it together into a fuller idea, and then it made more sense, and I was able to cut out the things that just weren't working and weren't necessary. And it was a lot easier to see, because I could see it through someone else's perspective rather than just my own.
And I think that that's something that you know, people, authors who write, people like Annabelle and I who write books for our jobs, it's such a collaborative process. We work with lots of different people who help us develop ideas and help make our stories better. And so I think that's something as well, for the books you read on the shelves haven't just come straight out of our brains with no help at all. Oh, I've lost you visually, there you go. And it's a great idea. And I think perhaps if you're a writer, it's things like talking to your teachers or talking to your friends about ideas you have, and kind of bouncing ideas off each other. I'm always interested in how writers use music. Do you listen to music while you write? Do you take inspiration from music, or is that something that you don't use at all with your writing?
No, definitely. So I'm a musician, like not professionally, but I play in a band, and
amazing.
I always learn instruments. I play saxophone and I sing, so I definitely listen to music and find it inspiring, to the point where I've actually got a book which I'm writing about jazz music.
Awesome.
Which I'm really excited about, and I've been working on for a long time. And so I've been talking to a lot of jazz musicians and trying to write music, write the experience of listening to music, which is really interesting. So I always listen. For that book, I'm listening to jazz when I write it. But for other books, I like to listen to classical music, because it has no words and it helps you to focus. I think I find inspiration and ideas from all different types of art, not just books. And I think that's something that's really important to say to the people watching. You know, you don't have to find your inspiration just from one source. You can find it from TV and films and radio and podcasts. And you know, I got a lot of podcasts, sort of mystery podcasts, that I was listening to when I was writing Agent Zaiba. So music is definitely. Do you like listening to music when you write?
Yeah, I'm the same. So I sometimes listen to music with words when I'm like doing the very first kind of vibes, like coming up with a vibe and a feeling. And I often end up with one piece of music in particular that I feel like really summarizes the tone of a book. But yeah, I listen to classical music a lot whilst I'm first drafting. I have playlists for different like epic kind of stuff where I write action scenes and more kind of relaxed emotional stuff. And then I use, when I'm editing, I even find classical music too distracting when I'm editing. So I use soundscapes on YouTube. You can get like 3 hours long, and it's just different, like a cafe or a forest, or there's one which is like an ancient library and it's like pages turning and it's raining. And so I
want to listen to that one.
I find them so, because they kind of take me out. I get less distracted, but by the real world, but it's not got really anything going on. I don't get distracted by listening to a beautiful piece of music. It's just kind of like pleasing. Like, what's the can music be aesthetically pleasing? What's the like
orally pleasing?
Like, it's just really satisfying to listen to. So that's what I use. But I'm the same, that apart from when I'm really at the very beginning, I can't use music with, well, I think that makes sense. I don't know how how do you write your own words if someone else is talking? But I have writer friends who do use music with lyrics, and I'm always very impressed that they can sort their own words out from that.
I had for Llama on a Mission, which is coming out, I had a really quick turnaround when I got the edits back, and I was like intensely like on my laptop, and I went to a cafe when you were still allowed to do that, and put my headphones in, and I was listening to, I don't even know what it was like top pop songs or something, and it was just all music like da, 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 da. I was like,
you're just like, oh. I love that. But music, I'm always amazed by how quickly it can put you into a certain headspace. And I find it really, if I'm struggling to concentrate, it's for me, it's like a real shortcut to trying to get into like a focused headspace, is using music. Right, I have got a couple more questions. So firstly, what can we expect from you next? So Llama on a Mission is coming out this week. And what are there other books we can look out for you coming on the horizon?
So yeah, Llama on a Mission, and then Agent Zaiba Investigates the Haunted House has just come out as well.
Yes,
that's a new one. There will be a fourth Agent Zaiba Investigates book about a smuggler's shipwreck, which is very exciting. And then the unknown, because hopefully these two new book series will go ahead, but I don't know when they'll come out. And hopefully my book about jazz will come out as well, but I'll have to just let everyone know. So yeah, these are the most recent ones.
Yeah, no, I'm asking you what's coming next, and you've already got so many. We've got 2 new books just come out or just about to come out for you already. And as always, I will leave information in the description box about where you can find Annabelle's books and more about Annabelle. So my last question for you, obviously over the course of this chat, we've talked about quite a lot of actually tips and advice for young writers who are sort of struggling to find ideas, but if you had a sort of like top tip for young writers who kind of find it hard to come up with ideas or develop ideas, what would be your top tip for young writers?
I would say, I guess kind of what we already said, that you can find ideas absolutely anywhere, and just because you want to write a book, it doesn't mean you need to get inspiration from a book. You can get inspiration from loads of different genres, loads of different art sources, and also from people. You could speak to your parents and say, what's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? What's a really funny thing that happened to you when you were younger? And that could be turned into a story or expanded into a story. But when that inspiration comes and when you feel creative, that's the time to write. That's the time to sit down and get your stories out. Don't try and force it, because I've seen if you try and force creativity, It doesn't work because creativity is supposed to be fun and writing is supposed to be fun. So keep the fun alive and the ideas will come to you.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling us a bit about where you get your ideas from and how you develop them. And as I said, yes, more information all about Annabelle and her books in the description box. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that's it for episode 6. I really hope that you have enjoyed meeting these 3 authors and hearing a bit more about their books and how they write. Just a reminder that if you would like to be part of the Bookwanderers Club or you'd like to share your stories, you can email me at that email address there. And you can find out more about all of the authors featured and their books at mybookshop.org link, which there is a link for in the description box. I will be back on the 28th of May with episode 7, but until then, happy book wandering.